have the topic of getting ready for high school and how to support your teens' mental health and well-being during this transition to a new school. So we'll start off with introductions, and I'll have a couple of points to cover before we start in on our content. So introductions, my name is Lisa Bechtel, and I'm a psychological services consultant with the board. Irene.
And I'm Irene Denbach-Lammers. I am also a psychological services consultant with the school board.
Barb.
And I am Barb Shannon. I am a school social worker at the school board.
So we will be recording this session. So keep that in mind, that we will record the session. So if you want, you can turn off your camera. You can change your name if you'd like, it's fine, but just so you're aware that we are recording the session. And then once we review it, we will be posting it on the Psychology YouTube channel. We can put the link for the Psychology YouTube channel in the chat box. When the video is ready, we'll be posting it up there. Since we are recording the presentation, we actually do want to keep questions to the end. We will have time at the end for question and answer period. So if you can hold on to your questions until then, we will stop the recording and then we'll have some conversation and do some Q&A. You can enter your questions into the chat box and we'll try to keep track of those questions and answer as we are able at the end. And when you do ask questions, again, you can unmute and put your camera on if you'd like at the end, and we can answer your questions at that point. We are finishing up the school year. So this is the last lunch and learn of our academic school year. So we do have schedules to start up again in September. So we do hope to see you again back in September for our lunch and learns. I think we are ready to go. So we do have a lot of content to cover, and we do hope you enjoy the presentation, and we're going to ask Barb to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. So I am a social worker. My high school is Grand River Collegiate is where I am based out of. And this is a presentation that I had done at the grade 8 night that they thought would be best if we could branch it out and provide it to a number of parents instead of just the parents of Grand River Collegiate. So this is just about how to support your teens' well-being and mental health during that transition to high school. So today's presentation, I'm going to be talking about what does that transition look like to high school for the teens, but also for you as a parent, mental health and well-being, and what is that and what does that look like? Stress and anxiety, the reaction of the brain and the body to stress and anxiety. I am big on providing that psycho ed on what actually happens in the brain and the body and how do we make that connection for ourselves, but also for our children. And then the warning signs, what to look for as to whether or not that stress and anxiety is starting to become problematic. And what do we do as parents? And then the resources that are available in the school as well as in the community. So I always like to start by talking about how high school is awesome. It is an awesome time. I was just saying to the ladies before we came on here that today at Grand River is the grade 8 orientation day. So buses of grade 8s are going to come in and the kids are so excited, get to meet new people, see what school's going to look like for next year. But at the same time, I also like to acknowledge that high school is really hard as well. And I think sometimes we forget of all of the different dynamics that come into play for young people when they enter into high school. And we look back as mature beings at that time through kind of our own lens, but we forget that there's new ways and there's new things and there's all this social navigation that happens and this new academic pressure. And, you know, realistically, it's the first time they're entering into potentially failing and having to redo courses, right? And then there's the whole stress of getting to know the buildings and guidance counselors and the supports in a new building, right? So although it's extremely exciting and it's super awesome, it is hard. So I just got to move this box, sorry. So let's look at acknowledging that hard. So high school involves a number of different changes for parents as well as the teens. And that for parents, I hear often that parents feel like once their kid goes to high school, they start to lose connection with the school. And it's almost like parents are not sure what part they're still responsible for and what not. And they start to kind of lose control because, you know, in elementary, most of the elementaries that I support, the kids are kind of there all day in that space. Where at high school, they have, you know, lunch times, they're off property, they're transitioning between classes. So we start to lose some of that control. I think it's super duper important that I stress that this separation from parents and this of you feeling like you're losing control of your child is a completely normal part of development. This is a developmental stage where adolescents are going to start separating themselves from their parents, start attaching more to peers and trying to do things on their own. And I just really strongly encourage people not to interfere with that process. I did put a little point in here that I feel like the pandemic has really, I don't blame it for a lot, but I do think that it has complicated this natural stage because for so many years, you know, speaking even as a parent, we had our children with us and we knew everything all the time. So now to send them out into a world where we might not always know what's happening is also anxiety provoking for us as parents. And I think it's really important as parents that we manage our feelings and our anxiety around this new stage of life for our teens. And one thing that I always note is just around that contagion of mood. We are social beings and mood is contagious. I often use the example that if I come home and I've had a great day, but my husband's had not such a great day at work, and I came in the door and said, like, oh, everything was awesome. And I noticed his mood, and he was like, really? Because my day was horrible. We naturally drop our mood to adjust. I wouldn't keep being like, oh, that's too bad. My day was great, right? Like we automatically drop our mood to match the other person. And the same thing with anxiety. If you're anxious and you are exuding anxiety, your child is going to pick up on that and start to feel anxious themselves. So I think sometimes identifying where we're at as parents while our kids move on to this new stage is really, really important. So let's talk about mental health. So mental health is not mental illness. So I make this distinction in all my presentations, including ones that I do with students. So mental health is really about it's like just like physical health and dental health, we all have mental health. So mental illness is a diagnosed condition where mental health is just a part of our natural being. And our mental health ebbs and flows throughout the day, kind of depending on where we're at. So examples I will give kids is you could have been having a great morning, your sibling irritated you, it kind of temporarily impacts your mental health because you're grumpy, but then you go to school and you see your friends. So your mental health kind of balances, bounces back. Right. I know from personal experience, one of the things that highly impacts my mental health is whether or not I'm hungry, right? The whole hangry saying that highly impacts my mental health. When I am hungry, I have a hard time regulating my emotions and my reactions. That's a part of my mental health. And really what life is and how I teach teens all the time is life is about balancing. It's a balancing act of life. And how do we do that in order to be the best people that we can be and kind of keep things balanced? I will often say to teens and students that I work with as well, is sort of like being on a trampoline and that we're kind of like bouncing along and we're feeling pretty good. But then somebody comes along much larger than us and kind of jumps on the trampoline and throws us off balance, right? Life does that to us on an ongoing basis. And I just presented to 10 grade 7 and 8 classes yesterday at another school. And I told them that there is no wand or solution or remedy or pill that is going to prevent us from getting bounced by life, right? This is a part of it. And every time we get bounced, the stronger we get, because that's how we learn resilience, problem solving, and many other strategies. So, this is another one of the slides that I often use with young people as well, just looking at the wheel of well-being. When we think of ourselves as well as our children and our students, and putting ourselves or the student in the middle of this, I really like to encourage people to make sure that we have little nuggets of things in all of these different areas in our life. So the example I gave to all my presentations yesterday was my niece is a 13-year-old elite athlete. She's a ringette player, and she is 100%, well, 50% into physical health and 50% into school. That is what consumes her everyday part of her life. I can tell you that during the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, the two things that were closed down the quickest were schools and recreational sports. And I can tell you that watching her struggle was very, very challenging. And that is because the only two areas that she was invested in life were taken away from her. So I really say, if we look at best supporting our children, we need to be able to make sure that they, are able to talk about the emotions, that they have some kind of physical activity or kind of physical health, relationships with peers, with family members, with community. Spirituality to me is very different than religion. Spirituality is just about recognizing that there's something bigger in the earth than us, right? And that creativity and thinking. I always say my daughter is incredibly creative when I allow her to be bored. And sometimes, being able to tap into those moments is really super important, so that, for somebody like myself who, I work out 5 or 6 or 7 days a week. If I broke my leg, my mental health would still be okay, because I have things and all these other components to kind of carry me through until I heal. So I really encourage people to look at this. And when we look about how do we position our children in the best position moving forward, this is a really key component. So then now let's look at stress and anxiety. And sometimes we use these kind of terms intermixed, right? And this is kind of that state of worry or mental tension due to a difficult situation. And this is a piece of where sometimes kids say to me, I don't want any stress or I don't want any anxiety. And I'm like, we actually require that. And this little diagram shows that if we had no stress or no worry about anything, we would be far too laid back. We wouldn't study, we wouldn't prepare, we wouldn't do our academics, we wouldn't really plan for the future, right? It is that stress and that anxiety that drives us. What's most important to me, so students will come to me and say, I am so incredibly anxious. I didn't study for my science test, and now I have my test next period and I'm going to fail. They're more worried about feeling anxious, where I tell them, of course you're anxious. That is a normal human reaction based on the situation that you have created. So it would be unrealistic to assume our body not to be stressed when we haven't properly prepared, right? So when we have stress, that is usually when people perform. That is when athletes perform, and that's where people in the academic world will start to perform, because they feel the stress. Where stress becomes a problem is when it becomes too much, or when it becomes too prolonged. This can lead to anxiety, depression, breakdown, burnout. So having moments of stress, we actually don't want to avoid, and we want our children to experience those. But the prolonged or long-term stress is what could potentially start to interfere with mental or physical functioning. So that's what we want to be cautious of. So I do this with everybody. This is that psychoed piece that I talk about is so necessary. So I'm going to use, hopefully people can see me, I'm going to use my hand as the brain. Because what we need to understand is that in the center of our brain is our amygdala. That's our fight, flight, freeze responder. All around the outside of that is our limbic system. That's memories, emotions, and feelings. So what ends up happening with us is something triggers this amygdala to be able to tell our body and our brain to prepare for stress or danger. And this is where sometimes when the amygdala gets set off in a sudden burst, or in my world, I call it a hijack, its only job is to tell my brain and my body that something isn't right, that there's danger. So my brain doesn't know the difference between a saber-toothed tiger or a math test. So what our body reaction will be is the exact same. This part of our brain has one job only, and it's not smart enough to know the difference of the level of threat. So if somebody experiences a high level of anxiety, or what some might call like an anxiety attack, what ends up happening is the amygdala trips off the front part of the brain, which goes offline, right? This in an academic setting is highly problematic because this part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, is the part that holds all of our information, our problem solving, and our rationalizing and reasoning. So in an academic setting, if a young person does not manage their mental health and their stress accordingly, their stress can trigger off a reaction that actually prevents them from accessing that part of their brain, which is all the information they need in order to perform that task. So I often share with people that if I look back at my high school years, I almost guarantee that I had this system go on every time I wrote a math test because I would study, study, study. I wouldn't sleep properly. I wouldn't eat properly. I would go sit down. I would be jamming to the last minute. I would turn the test over. And all of a sudden, I couldn't remember my name. And I often say to students, that's not because you didn't study hard enough, and that's not because you instantly lost everything or you did something wrong. What it actually is that the stress and the anxiety in your brain has actually taken you away from accessing all of the information that you've learned so strongly. So research tells us it takes us about 15 to 18 minutes for that part of the brain to come back down. So sometimes if somebody has that happen, they almost kind of give up, they calm down, and then halfway through, they'll look down and be like, oh my gosh, I know that answer. And then they'll start filling out the test, but they might not be able to get that test finished now because now they've taken 18 minutes because of the stress induced reaction in their body. So I always let people know this, as well as what happens in the body. Students will come into my office and they're pretty convinced that they have something physically wrong with them, right? Because when this happens, what it does is it releases adrenaline in our body. And when it releases adrenaline, the certain organs in our body do certain things depending on that. So one of the things is it makes it incredibly difficult for the, sorry, I'm confused by my slides here. Sorry, I got distracted. So one thing that it does is it makes it incredibly difficult for our breathing. So people will talk about short, contracted breaths, hard to breathe, feel like they're having chest pain. They'll talk about their heart racing, right? Lightheadedness, shakiness. And often they will come to me and they're like, something's seriously wrong. And this is a time where I coach young people through the fact that no, in fact, you're having a stress reaction. And what we need to do in this moment is we actually need to be able to calm your brain and your body in order for you to move forward. If they go down the rabbit hole thinking that they're having a heart attack or, they're going to pass out, it is going to further this cycle of the physical reaction and the mental distress. So again, I always just think this is really important. Oh, and the other piece of this is when we are under chronic stress, one of our systems that are most attacked is our GI system. So I will say from experience, there's many times that I work with families and young people, and they're out trying to figure out what is medically wrong with their stomach because they have stomach pains, they get diarrhea, they can like vomit under the pressure of having to perform or go to school or do these certain tasks. And I will say getting medically assessed is definitely an important piece. However, when that adrenaline goes to these different organs in our body, it's a chemical and we have a chemical reaction. And our stomach is considered a non-essential system in the grand scheme of protecting us against threat. So my body is smart enough to know that digesting my hamburger from lunch is not important in this very moment because I'm under threat. So when we have stress and over chronic periods of time, our digestive system does not work. It shuts off, right? So this is where people start getting the stomach pain and the digestion issues. So yes, get it cleared by medical, but if it's cleared and that's not it, then we have to look at managing that stress and that worry to make sure that it's actually not creating physical symptoms that are unwanted. So as a parent, what do you do? And what kind of things do you look for? So the warning signs would be getting significantly lower marks. I will put this caveat in there that going into high school, the marks are potentially going to change, right? It's a different way of learning. So I would say, the first couple assignments that coming home, that's not what we're looking at. It's more over a longer period of time. Are the marks starting to drop, right? Like I said, please don't use the first few months of grade 9 as a marker of anything, because that's an adjustment period. Is a young person avoiding friends and family or school? Are they starting to, say that they're sick and avoiding things, isolating themselves? These would be concerns as to whether or not they're managing the stress, worry, or whatever mental distress appropriately. And then not doing things they used to enjoy. When a student who was very, very involved in clubs and activities and sports all of a sudden starts dropping out of those activities, that is a warning sign that needs to be acknowledged. Loss of energy or motivation. I always joke, I know there's some out there that are highly motivated, but the lack of energy just runs with adolescence as well. So again, you need to measure this according to what would be the baseline for your child, because lots of times people are like, my teen should have more energy. And I'm like, yeah, that's about 90% of parents are saying that to me at this point in time. Frequent anger, sadness, or mood swings. I often say that anger is a secondary emotion. So sometimes for some teens, it's easier to show that they're angry than that they're sad or stressed or anxious. Anger, I can't just become angry. I actually have to think about something or have something happen that creates a different emotion that creates anger. So when you're seeing the frequency of that start to increase, then I would be questioning kind of what's underlining under that. Feeling very low, worrying constantly. Again, worry is normal. Worrying constantly starts to become problematic, and it's creating that physical reaction. Changes to sleep, eating, and eating habits. Taking risks such as drinking, drugs, unprotected sex. Again, some of those experiential stuff is a normal part of adolescence, but just kind of keeping an eye on that. And then not concerned about their appearance, are starting to be obsessed with the weight. And I threw that one in just because sometimes when somebody is anxious, they start to obsess and focus on the things they feel they have control over if they feel like they don't have control over other things. And for adolescents, there's a heavy emphasis on appearance. So I feel like weight and being obsessed about weight is something that I see fairly frequently. So then what can you do as a parent? So check in with your teen. And please, not just during the hard times. Many teens will come to me and say, the only time my parents talk to me is when they get a call from the school or when I look sad. When we do that, we are creating potentially a slippery slope of the student needing to feel bad in order to have a conversation, right? So we just want to check in with them all the time. You might not get many answers, and that's fine, but your job is to just check in with them. And be creative with your check-in, right? Not like, how was your day? Fine, or right, is what a lot of teens will give you. But instead be like, hey, so what ended up happening in math class? Did you end up getting that worksheet done? Like that's an authentic check-in versus like that whole, like, how are you? Good kind of exchange that we do with people in the grocery store. And then remaining calm yourself. Going back to that whole mood is contagious piece, please remember the calmer you are, and you are role modeling the behavior in that moment. And then listen. Spend time listening to their words, their actions, and their behaviors, because sometimes they don't always match up. They can say they're fine, but looking at their actions and their behavior, they may not be, right? So actually trying to connect all three of those to kind of figure out where things are at. And I call a spade as a spade. So for my daughter, if I say, how are you? And she's like, fine, but her body interactions are telling me that she's not, I will actually say like, oh, well, I hope that's the case, but it doesn't really look like that to me. Right. So I'm at least letting my child know that I'm acknowledging that something is going on here. I'm not going to necessarily get up in their business and be all like, tell me about it. What's going on? I know something's bugging me, right? That would be a pretty fast way of shutting down an adolescent. But instead letting them know that you acknowledge that something's off and that you're there to talk. And then encourage healthy habits, eating, sleeping. I cannot press this enough because far too often Kids will come into me and say that they're feeling anxious when I've discovered that they've actually ate nothing that whole entire day. And I will often say to them, the physical reaction to low blood sugar is so similar to anxiety. We can only assume it's anxiety, but we actually don't know that. It could be because they haven't taken care of themselves. So I know as our young people get older, they want to live this autonomous life and have their own rules. But it is really super important that we continue to set some of those healthy routines and sleeping habits. And one of them, which is the least popular of the suggestions I give from my adolescents, would be monitoring the technology use at nighttime. I cannot tell you how many youth I work with who are saying they're struggling with mental health, stress, or anxiety that are on their phone into the wee hours of the night and coming to school on 4 hours sleep. It is humanly impossible to be functioning and to be mentally well on a regular, if you're having those habits on a regular basis. So please continue. There's many parts of parenting we need to let go of. But those are the pieces that are really important that we continue to be a part of as even throughout high school when they think they're adults. And then speaking in short and simple sentences. This is one where I even catch my husband doing it. I'm going to throw him under the bus here because he's not here. But when somebody is feeling stressed or anxious, they don't need a lot of words. And if you overcomplicate your sentences and you try to get into explaining things or having them try to explain to you, it is probably not going to end up in effective communication. And that is because in the moment that somebody is highly anxious, they actually have a hard time formulating their thoughts because of this reaction. So they have a hard time forming their thoughts or explaining why. And when we overtalk or ask them why and they can't answer, we actually can stress the situation out more. So short, simple sentences is key when somebody is under a high level of stress. I also say acknowledge the hard. This is the whole, empathize and validate how they're feeling. So you don't have to get into like, but why are you feeling like that? Right? We don't have to get into that, but we can say, I know that this is really hard for you. Right? I know that, experiencing your first exam in high school is really, really hard for you. I get that. Right? That's all. They just need to know that you get it. We don't need people to always agree with us. And we don't need people to solve our problems, but we do need them to get us, right? Please encourage your children and your youth to develop their own critical distress tolerance. So this is being okay with being uncomfortable. That is really what that means. So all the time, kids will be uncomfortable with something. And us as parents, we don't like our kids to be uncomfortable and we just want to fix it and make it better. And there are certain times where that's appropriate, but many times we need our children to have that experience to realize that they can tolerate something that's not overly comfortable and to develop their own problem solving skills and flexible thinking, right? So we can jump in and problem solve for them, but we are setting them back by doing that. We need them to be able to do that for themselves. And we need to manage our discomfort because our discomfort is different than theirs and they need their own process through that. And then support the effort over perfection. Please don't expect perfection. And actually, as the little thing says here, mistakes are stepping stones to learning. And I'm a huge believer of that. There's so much learning through failure and mistakes that we don't want to rob our children of having that experience because that's how they learn the resilience and the grit to move forward. So the first time that a student experiences any kind of mistake or failure, I don't want it to be in post-secondary when there's $20,000 a year on the line. I want it to be during those grade 9, grade 10 years where all their family is around them and the school's there to support them to help them pick up the pieces so they can learn from that to move on. So if you are worried about your child and youth, again, spend time, check in and listen. Encourage them to speak to a trusted adult. It might not be you. You know what? The reality is kids don't want to talk to the parents, even if the parents are wonderful. So just any trusted adult, school, coach, anybody, or seek support from the school and the community. And what a lot of parents don't realize is the depth of support that's available at high school. So at high school, there's the teachers, which will be rotating, right? Then there'll be vice principals, there will be coaches, there's guidance counselors, there's child and youth workers, there's social workers. All of these people are available, as well as if your child has an IEP, there would be a cert attached, right? There's layers and layers of support. So if you're worried about their ability to manage stress, instead of coming in and problem solving it with them, try to encourage them to have a conversation with one of these people, or you can coordinate a meeting with your child present with any of these people to be able to kind of figure out the next steps. And then, of course, if it's to the point where you think it's more almost kind of a therapeutic need to deal with it, because, the school is really set up to support, educational goals. So if you're sort of like, now we've approached a problematic level of anxiety or worry or stress, and this is on an ongoing basis, then I always encourage people to reach out. We have some phenomenal community supports and services available. The last link there is Psychology Today. Some people don't know what that is. So that is almost like a Google search of therapists and psychologists and psychotherapists. So if somebody was looking at getting their young person connected with counseling, they could go on there, see profiles of individuals, that links to their websites, and kind of pick and choose. I always say include your child in the process to say, who do you think is a good fit for you, and be able to walk through that process.